All right. Well, today we have Dr. Anthony Saway. He's my personal rheumatologist, great physician, great man. And we're going to talk about all things inflammation, or maybe not all things because we don't have a year to do this podcast, but we're going to touch on some high points of inflammation and about how rampant it is in our society. So, starting with that, Anthony, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, glad to have you. So, what's the difference between longevity and health span?
Well, longevity is how long we live. And, basically that's the very simple part. And health span is how long we're healthy. So if you look at them, in our country, we, on average, if you take every person, we live to be about 79 years old, male and female. And that's not really very good when you look at the world. There are people in Monaco live to be 85, in Japan 85. So we're behind much of the world. The other thing we're behind in is health span. Our health span is shorter than a lot of other countries because we're not healthy our fullness of our life. We become ill somewhere before we die, before the end. And we spend a number of years, in fact, it's about 12.4 years average time that we're ill before we die. So the goal, I think, of longevity medicine, nobody wants to live forever, I don't think, but I think we all want to be healthy until that time comes. And that's the difference between longevity and health span in this country is a long time. So the goal, I think, that we need to be striving for is to be as healthy as we can for as long as we can.
So would it be fair to say that we favor quality over quantity?
I think that's the most concise way to put it.
All right, so I like that equation.
Yeah.
So let's pursue quality. I'm intrigued that our lifespan is shorter than the rest of the world, and I wonder if some of it has to do with our affluence. I mean, does that I guess that takes into account death by accident and firearm-related deaths and things of that nature that may not be present in other societies?
Part of it is that, but a lot of it is chronic disease. We have so much chronic disease that shortens our lifespan. We have longevity because we have answers to things like heart disease and cancer, so people are living longer. But the way we live is not the most healthy way to live in general in this country. And that accounts for the chronic diseases that come up. The other reason we have short lifespan in this country is because of drug overdoses and suicides. A lot of mental health things contribute to a shorter life expectancy than we would have in other countries too.
Yeah, that's a good point. It kind of emphasizes spirituality and community and the importance of that in healthy aging and longevity.
I think that's the key, to be honest. I think if you have a solid spiritual foundation, a good mental outlook on life, you can overcome most things, and you can do well.
Great. So inflammation. I'm assuming, my impression is we have an epidemic of inflammation in our country. Could you define inflammation, and then maybe we'll do a little deeper dive into causes and what inflammation does to our health span?
Yeah. Well, as we were taught in medical school, you and I, that there's acute inflammation and there's chronic inflammation. And acute inflammation is what you inflicted on people when you did your surgery on them, you cut them, and they had acute inflammation where you put that cut. And the healthy part of inflammation and the value of inflammation is it heals that up. It protects us from the immune system protects us from infection, and it helps us repair damaged tissue. And that's just two major roles. It also does other signaling things that are a little more complex that probably wouldn't be helpful to discuss here. So acute inflammation is usually self-contained, and it resolves when everything is over. You have a mechanism in place to turn it off. Chronic inflammation is different. It's much more subtle. You don't have all the signs of inflammation that you have when you have acute inflammation. And it's associated with subtle changes in physiology that create disease and illness. And by that, I mean the diseases that you can encounter are things like Parkinson's and dementia, asthma, COPD, diabetes, arthritis. I should skip the thing that I do. And all of that kind of gradually occurs, and then it can eventually take off and contribute to multiple illnesses. That's the common pathway for so many of these chronic diseases that we have. And the immune system is valuable, but it can get imbalanced. And in that imbalance, that's when we begin to suffer. And sometimes when that imbalance gets too great, then it becomes self-perpetuating, and it just goes on, and you have to make some intervention to alter that.
So for our immune system, which is intricately designed, it's an incredible part of our body and the work it does. When it flips from being your friend to your foe, what causes the switch to flip for that? I mean, are there a milieu of contributors, or are there maybe 1, 2, or 3 main things that are contributing to the going from friend to foe?
I think some multiple things. Much of them are summed up in the way we live. Inflammation can be brought on by an infection, and you can have chronic infections that can stay with you. Or you can be exposed to some chemical or toxin that can make you sick, and it can create a chronic inflammatory state. Or your immune system can sometimes get confused and fail to recognize self from self, and it can create autoimmunity. So there's different mechanisms, but what I see in my practice mostly are people who come in who have lifestyles that are not conducive to health. And they're in there feeling bad, joint pain, fatigue, no energy. They have mildly abnormal lab tests. And they're coming to see me thinking they have some sort of disease process, but many of people just have an imbalanced lifestyle. They're stressed, they don't sleep, they don't eat healthy, they don't exercise. And all of these things in and of themselves are set up a physiology that's pro-inflammatory.
So we might call that a disease in and of itself, maybe the disease of modern industrial societies.
We could get that way. We could say that.
Okay. So, what percent of patients, well, all your patients, I guess, are inflamed one degree or another.
Usually.
But what percent of the population do you think in the United States is inflamed?
That would be, I think, with chronic inflammation, I think a safe bet would be what's the incidence of chronic disease in the United States. And they say that it may be 4 out of 5 Americans.
I was going to say between 60 and 80%.
Yeah, it's a high number. So it is in that arena. So most of us are carrying around some degree of inflammation. In fact, one of the uninvited or unprovoked causes of inflammation is just having birthdays, because as we age, our immune system senesces and it does not function as properly as it did when we were younger. And that imbalance and that malfunction is pro-inflammatory. It pushes us towards inflammation. So a lot of aging is inflammation, which I guess is why we're here. We're talking about longevity and aging.
Correct.
So I got it right.
So if aging is its own inflammatory agent, and we want to improve health span, what we want to do is be like a Blue Zone person. We want to be healthy and vibrant till those last few weeks of life, so we can just suck out the mirror of life, enjoy our family and friends and all that God's given us. So if aging is part of the problem, and it's also the problem we're trying to fix, how do you fix the effects of aging on the body that creates its own inflammation?
Well, lifestyle, I think, is probably the short answer to that. I think because there are clearly people who live, as you mentioned, in the Blue Zone to they are 100 years old and older. And some of it's genetics, but they do say that genetics is probably about 30% of what we turn out to be, and the other 70% is lifestyle. So we may have bad genes in our family, but if we choose a very healthy lifestyle, especially if we choose it early, then we can overcome a lot of that genetic disadvantage we might have had at the beginning. So lifestyle is the key, I think. And then as we age, there are some things we can do now that are helpful. I think, personally, I think one of the most important things for people as aging is maintaining their hormone balance. And, and I'm talking about thyroid and DHE, testosterone, estrogen. I think that ranks very high in terms of maintaining health, because when you lose your hormone balance, those imbalances are also pro-inflammatory, and they push you towards inflammation. And the prevalence of diseases like dementia, metabolic disease, cardiovascular disease is much higher in people who are low in their sex hormones. So hormone balance is an important part of this as well. That's off topic though, so we'll go back to inflammation.
Well, that's an interesting topic though, and I think we can touch on hormones in another discussion. But I guess my question would be, just related to hormones before we move on, is I've read some papers related to cadaveric specimens and the amount of microplastics in our organs, and that over the past 30 years or so, we've seen this decline in testosterone production in young men, which I'm sure is related to microplastics to some degree.
Right.
Is how much of this endocrine issues that we're seeing today are related to microplastics, or do you know, or do you have a sense?
Well, I don't know that I know the exact numbers on that, but I think it's definitely an issue. I was listening to Casey Means the other day, and she was talking about we get like a credit card of plastics very often in all that we eat and all that we're exposed to, that amount in our system. And that's just not a natural thing that our body's meant to clear, and so it's more difficult to be rid of that, and it is an endocrine disruptor. But the reason I brought up the hormone issue in terms of inflammation though is because if you kind of look at the decline in the immune system, it parallels the decline in hormone status. But also there's other things that play a role into that. It's stress, a lot of stress in life. We get exposed to things that damage our DNA and impair our ability to our cells to function as properly as they would otherwise. So all of these kind of gradually occur over time. And I like the car analogy. You can have a nice car, and if you take good care of it, it'll run better and longer for a long period of time. But it's going to eventually wear down because nothing holds up forever. We produce a lot of reactive oxygen species. That's called oxidative damage. That's basically the hallmark of aging as we get older, and that's when we change the way we look, and everything is because we get these reactive oxygen species that are byproducts of physiology and metabolism, and they are damaging. And if we don't have antioxidants to combat that, then we get more damage, and that's one of the other factors that kind of contributes to aging. But again, lifestyle to me is so important, and when I look at the people that come into my practice and I see the things that they're struggling with, most of them are struggling with inadequate sleep, most of them are struggling with stress. Those are probably the two biggest things that I see coming in. And if you can modify those factors, people can all of a sudden have a grip on their life, because if you can sleep, you can cope better. If you're not sleep deprived, if you're stressed, you can bring your stress level down. That's less inflammatory, and you're able to have more resilience, which I think is another topic we can address. So it's all about trying to develop this metabolic reserve that we need. That's what longevity medicine is about, developing the metabolic reserve we need to deal with the insults that we're going to experience in life, the threats and the things that threaten our well-being, our health.
So when I think of oxidative byproducts and oxidative stress, I just think of, as far as just for kind of a layman's view of it, it's kind of like the hydrogen peroxide. It's just boiling out and just and destroying areas in your body, and damaging DNA, RNA, all sorts of messengers. Do you think that we have more oxidative byproducts as we age because we have less antioxidants or less ability to fight the oxidative stress, or are mitochondria less efficient? What is it that leads to that increase in oxidative
I
stress?
think all of those probably play a role. And I think the important thing comes back again to lifestyle. And if I had to pick the one most important thing to do in lifestyle besides sleep, because that's when we do all of our restoration, it would be to exercise, because exercise changes our body's physiology in so many ways that you can't, there's no drug that can even come close. And in many instances, there's no drug to take the place of what it does. It's just exceptional to be movement and being active. All of those are very important. So I would pick that one. That would be the one thing I would say is we need to begin to move. There's a little caveat to that, though. If you're very stressed and you go out and try to exercise fairly hard, you know, you're already in an inflammatory state, and if you push yourself too hard, you run the risk of too much exercise is pro-inflammatory, so you run the risk of exacerbating the problem. And we encountered that a lot when we used to see people with fibromyalgia a long time ago. We would try to prescribe exercise for them to try to help them to develop some resilience, and they couldn't do it. They just didn't have any reserve. And so you have to balance that amount of exercise. And for some people, the first amount of exercise they do is to get off the couch and walk around the room and get back down. You got to start where you are and then take those steps that are needed and move forward.
Like the map, you are here.
Yeah.
We want to get you here, but you are here.
That's right.
So what I tell my patients that come into my functional medicine practice that say, well, you know, I don't exercise, I don't feel like I have the energy, is just do me a favor, and for the next week, after each meal, walk for 5 minutes. Yeah. Just walk for 5 minutes. The pace doesn't have to be fast.
Right.
And then the next week, try 10 minutes after each meal.
That's great advice.
And you build up that exercise tolerance and that reserve slowly over time. But you're right. If you dangle this big goal in front of somebody, I mean, a marathon runner doesn't just wake up in the morning and say, well, hey, I'm gonna go, you know. They start off with short, you know, runs of 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles. They slowly build up. But it's not something that most of us are built to do out of the chute, especially if we've been sitting around eating potato chips and watching ESPN on TV, you know, or just, you have to build it slowly. So I understand completely that model that you're talking about.
You described hormesis basically, in which that is the what we do to build resilience. And what we do to build resilience, which is the ability to bounce back from things that pound us and beat on us and threaten us, is you take little stresses through the day, nothing that overwhelms you, but small stresses, so your system says, we got to be able to meet that challenge, so the body adapts to that little challenge. So when big challenges come, you know, it's prepared to handle it a little bit better. If you never stress yourself a little bit, you never can, you're going to lose that resilience that you need to remain healthy.
It's interesting because that's true in the test tube on single cell organisms and whatever. If they don't have stressors, they die.
Right.
So you have to have some stress or challenges in your life just to thrive.
Right.
I think some of us, you know, Americans, we're a very comfortable country. We have a lot of things. You know, you have air conditioning, you have all sorts of time-saving devices. We have this that, you know, you can sit around and do this and not exercise at all except your thumbs. And I think that is ultimately bad for us. I mean, if you don't have challenges in your life, then you'll never thrive.
Yes, I agree. And I think that, I worry a little bit about our kids, because, you know, you want them to suffer adversity to some extent. And you know, some kids handle that better than others, but it's the ability to get up and go again that's so important, and not just stay down if you get hit or whatever, as you know. So, but the other thing I want to talk about, though, that I think is so important for us is we're less mobile than European countries where they do a lot of walking. You know, their daily activities are walking. We don't sleep well. We're more stressed than them in general. And so that's part of the reason I think they live longer than we do. Also, they eat better than we do. They don't eat processed food. They don't eat foods with a lot of additives. They eat fresh foods. Foods that don't have a lot of herbicides and pesticides on them that are toxins that are damaging to us and challenge our liver and create inflammation. All of those things do create inflammation, and that translates into the disease processes that we see chronically.
I agree with that. I actually have an old friend who we used to play golf with, and every time he got on the green, he would lick the grass off his golf ball. And I said, "Why are you doing that? You have no idea what they've sprayed on this green." And then, the report came out that glyphosate is a contributor to Parkinson's, and he ended up developing Parkinson's disease. So, there's a lot of scary things out there. I mean, you can't live in a stressful state, frightened about everything, but you can make good choices.
You can, and also you can prepare yourself, and you can maintain a healthy environment as much as possible. So if you do encounter that, which you will, because you can't avoid them, the toxins are everywhere. But if you maintain a healthy lifestyle and you do the things that are appropriate, you can have resilience. You can get through that until you go into the next step.
So you're saying that when I rode my bike behind the DDT truck in New Orleans when they were spraying for mosquitoes, I was building resilience, or was I just being stupid?
I was thinking about that too, because when we were kids, we all ran out and got into the spray and we did that. But the thing that was different about us then is, we rode our bikes everywhere. We ate healthier because we ate home cooked food. There wasn't anything that was processed.
Other than Crisco.
Yes, but we were very healthy. I mean, we would bike 20, 30 miles a day. And down in the South, we had the advantage that we sweated.
We did.
And the sweat was a great means of eliminating a lot of those toxins. So I think we were probably spared from our stupidity.
Well, that's, I think that probably would be a good segue into how do you detox? So we have these exogenous toxins, the toxins that are out there like the glyphosate, and we don't have DDT anymore, but there's still insecticides and other chemicals. Yeah. We have mercury if you have mercury amalgam fillings, you got mercury in your mouth. Mm-hmm. What do you need to address, and what can you ignore, and how do you, I know sweating and mm-hmm. excreting the toxins, but how can you bind them and get them out of your system? Are there some simple kind of pieces of advice that you would give our audience?
Well, I think, not that I'm an expert in that area, but I do know that there are supplements that are designed for that purpose that you ingest them and they begin to draw and pull toxins out of your system. I think saunas are a great way to go for that, because if you can get a sauna or sweating, whatever you can do to get the sweat, because the sweat excretes a lot of the toxins that we're exposed to. But you do need to maintain liver health, and that needs to be done by making sure you eat the right foods that allow your three phases of conjugation to go on, or three phases of metabolism to go on in the liver to be dealt with. So all of that is important, and it's really simple, really, when you break it down. As long as you do the lifestyle things that matter, you eat healthy, avoid foods, avoid the exposures as much as you can. There are our shampoos for women, all the beauty products that they use. I mean, it's just a ton of stuff in that.
Yeah.
And many of them probably endocrine disruptors, and that's probably why they're struggling more in many ways. So
I agree with that. So, is there a way to measure inflammation? Like, say somebody's out there and they're listening and they're saying, "Well, man, I ache and I'm tired and I'm stressed and I don't feel like I'm well, but my primary care doc told me that this, that, and everything looks fine." Are there lab tests, or how would you determine that someone's inflamed?
Well, for acute inflammation, the markers are pretty good. They help you understand that your white cell goes up, your CRP goes up, your SID rate goes up. Chronic inflammation is much different. It's very hard to tell. In fact, I saw a lady the other day who had a neuroquant MRI, and she was having a lot of cognitive issues and some numbness on the side of her body, and it showed a lot of changes that were suggestive of neuroinflammation, but there's no blood test ever in a mouthpiece on that particular thing. Blood tests are not as helpful all the time. We look at white cell, we look at ferritin, we look at CRP, sed rate, we look at immunologic markers, and most often, I would say, we see patients who have low titer ANAs that are sent to us thinking they've been told that they have lupus or some autoimmune disease, and that's not the case. When you have inflammation, and a common cause of that is like gut inflammation, as you know. And so if you have dysbiosis in your gut, where you have abnormal bacteria because you've been eating unhealthy and you've been stressed and you have increased intestinal permeability and you get leakage of things into your submucosa of the gut lining, your immune system sees it and reacts against that inflammation. And in the process, a lot of times tissue, our healthy tissue, gets caught up in that process. And depending upon how long that inflammation goes, it can begin to recognize breakdown products within cells like nucleic acids as foreign substances, because ordinarily it doesn't see it floating around free in extracellular tissue. And so it may begin to react against it. That's the way we get autoantibodies. That's not synonymous with having an autoimmune disease, though. The autoimmune disease means that it's much further down the road. So you can see that. But people will get those tests, they'll come in, we'll see them, and I would say 90% of the time they have a lifestyle imbalance that we're addressing. They're stressed, they're not sleeping, they're not eating healthy, they're not exercising, they're not doing the things that matter.
So if I'm hearing you correctly with my dumb surgeon brain, but it sounds like this is a progressive disease that maybe starts with a little leaky gut reaction of our immune system to what it sees as foreign, that then somehow gets cross-communicated to recognize something that's a natural part of us, that then leads to some low-grade inflammation. Mm-hmm. And then you continue to feed it because you're eating processed foods, you're not eating well, you're not exercising, you're not doing the right things. And then that just keeps building up until it becomes something like a rheumatologic disease that you would treat, or a neurodegenerative thing like a mild cognitive impairment, or Alzheimer's, or one of the other dementias, or Parkinson's disease. But that's really late in this process that's going on. And the sooner you intervene with lifestyle changes, the better off you're going to be.
That's very, very well put. The gut has a strong communication with the brain, and the brain communicates with the gut. But it's felt like that a lot of that activity is gut to brain, because when you get gut inflammation, there's the neurologic input to the gut communicates with the brain, and it can change in such a way that you get neuroinflammation. So that's the reason a lot of times persons have brain fog and other issues that they're struggling with when they have gut issues, because they do have low-grade neural inflammation, and that has to be. And inflammation begets inflammation. Once you get it, it just goes on and on and on until you can disrupt it. And because generally it'll overwhelm, in chronic inflammation, it has overwhelmed the mechanisms that we have to turn it off. And so it just self-perpetuates until you can create a change in your physiology. And you can do that by lifestyle things. You can do that with foods, and you can do that with nutraceuticals as well. We try that some. You and I both listen to the Coach and Immunology stuff, and that I think that's just brilliant what comes out of that. And you talk about trying to balance your TH and T1, TH1, TH2 sides of the immune system, because they are inversely related. If one's up, the other's down. And the TH1 is the one we need to kind of fight off infections and all that stuff.
So just for our audience, TH1 is?
That's one arm of the immune system.
Is that a T cell?
It's a T cell.
Is that the helper, or is the H for helper?
It's a helper.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a helper cell. And then you have TH2, that helper cells. Both of them we need them both. But we need them balanced.
Okay.
And that's just like life. Everything needs to be balanced. And we're talking about balanced lifestyle, balanced immune system. And they fight each other to some extent. So when Th2, which occurs when you have like sinus infections, airway infections like lungs, gut, bladder, any hollow space infections, usually a Th2 driven infection, it impairs the Th1 response. So sometimes you have to help the Th1 to get back up there. And both of those contribute to what's called a Th17 response, potentially. The Th2 mostly, that can produce inflammation. So it's kind of fun to read about, but it's challenging sometimes to try to help people restore their balance because so much of it hinges upon a good, healthy lifestyle. And some people find that hard to do, and it certainly can't be done quickly. It takes time.
So Th2 is burning the bad stuff, and Th1's the fireman keeping the fire under control.
To some extent, when the Th2's out of hand, you want the Th1.
Right.
You want to support it.
So you mentioned the kind of the neural inflammation in the intestines, and I probably didn't have enough awareness of this when I was even after medical school. You knew about Peyer's patches and stuff, but could you kind of help us understand the huge immune system that resides in our intestine and how that plays such a role in this?
Yeah, the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, that's about 60 to 70% of our immune system there. And it's there for a reason. It's there to protect us and defend us. But it also communicates with the microbiome that we have in there because, 35% roughly of our metabolites that circulate come from our microbiome. And what determines our microbiome is what we eat. So, we can eat healthily, so we have a healthy microbiome, or we can eat unhealthily and have an unhealthy microbiome. But that gut tissue there that's where I think our greatest challenge are met many times, is in what we've ingested, what we've eaten, and what we need to be protected from. So it's intricate. It works like it would anywhere else. It's just a lot of it there.
Yeah. So it's basically a tube, but when it sprigs a leak, and then the immune system gets involved, there's a whole chain of immune patches all along the intestines that start reacting to whatever they've seen, and then that creates this milieu of inflammation that slowly spreads.
That's right. As for example, if you have a break in the intestinal lining and you have bad bacteria that are releasing lipopolysaccharides, which is a strong provoker of inflammation, if it seeps into the submucosa and creates inflammation, then the immune system there locally begins to take effect, but it also sends messages elsewhere to start recruiting help to come down and try to help us out. It's also sending signals to the brain, telling us, hey, things aren't right down here. And it becomes self-perpetuating until you can do something to reverse what you're doing.
I think the other thing that's interesting is that your microbiome, some of the signals it sends to your brain causes you to have cravings for things that microorganism wants to survive.
Yes.
And it's, you think that we're these robust human organisms and we think for ourselves. It is hard to wrap your head around the fact that this little one-cell organism is sending a signal to your brain that's telling you really need that sugar when you know you don't, and it makes you eat that sugar. It kind of turns my whole perception of me being this multicellular organism that's very advanced on its head, because I'm being run by this one-cell organism that just really wants some sugar so it can divide and multiply.
Yeah, but there's a trillion of those one-cell.
Well, that's true. That's
there's
true.
A lot of them.
I'm outnumbered.
They're outnumbered. But you're right. It does change. When inflammation goes, especially if there's organisms involved, they always try to find a way to hide and perpetuate their own existence, and so that's the way they operate. And then we have to have the resilience and the defense to defend it.
That's good. That's good. So, do you have any? It's hard to say. I suspect you wouldn't say yes. There's a really simple, here's 5 tools that you could use. But we mentioned diet and lifestyle. So on the diet end, as far as reducing inflammation, is there a particular diet that you lean on mostly with your patients, like say Mediterranean diet, or where do you go with that?
Yeah, usually I try to keep it simple because usually the information I'm presenting to them is overwhelming, first of all. And if they're just in a terrible way with incredibly bad gut issues going on, then I'll try to get them on an elemental diet for a couple of weeks and see if we can let things settle down. Then I'll try to move them to an elimination diet if that's the case. But I would say most of my patients that come in who have some gut issues, it's just not terrible. I try to put them on a supplemented Paleo-Mediterranean diet, and I give them a list of things to avoid, things they should eat, and then I supplement them usually with a quality multiple vitamin, vitamin D, which I think is integral to immune health, and also with the omega-3s, and that's kind of the starting point. I think that's an easy starting point for a lot of people. And not asking too much of them, at least from the dietary side.
So that raises two questions. Well, one, I think probably just to educate our people that are listening or watching. You and I know what an elemental diet is, but I think the average Joe on the street might not know what an elemental diet is. So could you explain an elemental diet?
Yeah, elemental diet is basically a diet where everything's been broken down to its basic form, like amino acids and has the basic minerals and vitamins in there that you need to live and function. So your gut really doesn't have to do any work, and there's no foreign antigens being presented to it. So it's just very basic, and it's funny. I had this one woman I was seeing, and I prescribed it to her, and she come back 2 weeks later, and she said, "I'm great. I feel great." And I mean, she was just thought she was dying when she was in. It can be transformative. It's just hard for people to stick to because it's not palatable. It doesn't have much.
So it's basically your digested food.
Yes.
It's sort of like it's already been digested, and all the basic, sugars and amino acids and everything ready to be absorbed.
Yeah.
Gives your intestine a break, which helps it heal.
Right.
Okay. And then vitamin D. Well, and I know, I don't know that everyone knows, but the Endocrine Society came out in the last year and a half, saying you shouldn't check vitamin D levels. Yeah. I think so. From my viewpoint, is a little misguided.
Right.
Vitamin D is essential for a lot of things.
Right.
But you mentioned vitamin D as one of your key components. Can you explain how it works and why it's so important?
Yeah, I think the thing it does is it helps kind of calm the immune system in many ways, but what it also does is help the immune system produce the substances it needs to defend us against viruses and bacteria and stuff. So it promotes the bacterial and viral killing properties of our immune system, while at other times it kind of calms it towards, in terms of inflammation. It kind of helps it have a calmer, more balanced effect so that it can do what it's supposed to do, be balanced. Not everybody would agree with this, but generally in the immune world, we like to see our patients around with a vitamin D level of 60 to 80 because we feel like they have better immune health. And there's, as you're aware, there was data from Germany from COVID. People who had high vitamin D levels, they did very well. And as opposed to people who had low vitamin D levels. And I think that's true in viral infections in general. So I think it's just so important, and I try to harp on my patients all the time about trying to keep their level in a good range and emphasize that normal is not optimal, which is, I think, the hallmark of functional medicine. Right. You're trying to optimize everything you have, not just accept I've got a normal value.
Which I guess, if you don't mind, going a little deeper dive and just explaining to our audience the normal and quote unquote normal lab ranges and what the ideal range would be, how we calculate normal, and then what is ideal, because most people I don't think are aware.
Yeah, normal, it comes from they take a population base and they draw blood on a bunch of people and they figure out what the normal is and they create a curve for that. And then they have a median, and that's halfway point, and then they have upper one end. It's kind of like a big hill, and you got at the top it's a median, and then you have those that are higher and those that are lower. And they say, well, this is just a normal range for people, but the populations that were studied may not have been normal, probably weren't normal. And so all of a sudden you're including people who have low level functioning things or levels of whatever it is you're measuring, and saying, well, that should be the normal range. And it is normal for a sick population, but it's not optimal for health. Is that what you were trying
Yeah,
to
I think so. And I guess I'd also say I think that this kind of the standard for most lab tests is a 95% confidence interval. So they're taking the middle 95% of us, and they're tossing out the lower 2.5% and upper 2.5%. So you could be on the low end of normal, but you could be the bottom 5 or 6% of the population with your level. And even the mean may not be ideal for us.
Right, and even some more. I think for each individual it'll be different, and what's normal for you may not be normal for me. So I mean, and so when someone tells you you're normal but you don't feel well, and you're trying to measure that particular parameter, and you think that needs to go up, it may need to go up because your genetics may be such that the way you metabolize and handle that particular product or vitamin or hormone or whatever, you may need to have a higher level for you personally. So you have to you have to individualize it basically.
It's interesting that we have all these beautiful colors of food, and you can look at it and just say, well, that's just the color it is. But the reason it's that color is it has a polyphenol with a specific function for us that produces that color. And so there's a saying in functional medicine, eat the rainbow, and I think that applies to this. Just briefly on the subject of epigenetics, we know that there are single nucleotide polymorphisms or mutations in this little single part of the genetics, and that some of them have significant effect on our ability to either metabolize, absorb, or utilize nutrition. And one of them that comes to mind that's pretty prevalent in our country is MTHFR. I don't know if you would want to mention that since it affects B vitamin.
It is. It's important because it affects the methylation that goes on with our genes and our histones, which are proteins that help modify genes, and it's important for health and in the repair process of health. If unmethylated genes are more susceptible to damage, and so you need to have a good methylation system, and that you're right, it's a huge number that are MTHFR deficient, and so you want to make sure that you get a supplement you probably need to supplement that, and I supplement usually using like a multiple vitamin that has the methylated forms of folate and B12, which help with that aspect. But that's so important, and we see a ton of people with rheumatoid that we treat that are on methotrexate, and we have to try to make sure that they're methylated because we're damaging their methylation capabilities with that while we're trying to help suppress their inflammation.
Right.
So again, that folic acid is so important, especially in the methylated form.
I make sure all my patients are taking at least half of their B vitamin in their capsule is methylated, so that they get the methylated folate, the methylated B12. Because if they have MTHFR, they're not utilizing the unmethylated form at all. Right. It's just a pure pass through. Right. So, anything else you think our audience needs to know? I mean, we haven't gone super deep into inflammation, but you know what? I think we've gone deeper than the amount of information in the immunology section of my Robinson-Bertrand when I was in medical school, which I think was about 10 pages. And when my dad was in dental school, it was 2 pages.
Yeah, there's a lot of gaps there. But it's very interesting when you talk about Robin's pathology because one of the opening paragraphs in that book talked about that the basis for all disease was in the biochemistry of the cellular function, and we you and I learned all of that, and then we were told to forget it and we would do everything else, and it's all circling back around to that. That's where it all happens, is at the cellular level, and I think it's important that we we kind of remember that, and we got to take care of ourselves, and we need to do that by the way we live.
It is interesting, and I comment on this frequently when I'm talking to patients. This is the part of medical school that we all threw aside. Like, now we get to go do the clinical stuff that really matters in healthcare, not realizing that we learned the essential stuff that we needed to know in our basic science classes, and we just didn't appreciate the fact that it was that important.
Well, they still don't teach nutrition, and they still don't teach that in medical school. They're just now beginning in a few schools to introduce nutritional health. We weren't taught how to help people be healthy. We were taught how to treat disease.
Correct.
And the best way to help people, I think, is to teach them to be healthy. I tell all my patients, if you want to be healthy, you have to pursue it. It just doesn't happen.
It's a discipline.
It's a discipline. If you don't want to be sick, you got to pursue health, and that's and I try to encourage them with that. And I realize, looking at myself too, I haven't done all the things I need to do immediately, but you take that little step and start.
Yeah, but you were a college athlete, so you got that going for you.
That came with some baggage too.
Maybe a couple of head thumps.
So yeah, a few concussions behind.
Yeah. Well, really appreciate you being here with us today, and I know that everybody that's watching and listening just learned a lot about inflammation. And maybe some of it's a little scary to think that your immune system can become an enemy of you, but it's also a lot of hope knowing that there's some really, I think, to myself, simple fixes if you'll just embrace the discipline and say, yes, I'm going to get active. Yes, I'm going to eat well. Yes, I'm going to quit indulging in this much sugar and try to live a healthy life.
Yeah, I think we're, like you mentioned at the outset, that we're so wonderfully designed, and our bodies have an incredible capability of repairing and restoring themselves if given a chance. We just have to give them a chance, and that means we have to make some adjustments. Avoid those toxins, healthy lifestyle, get your sleep, minimize your stress, socialize, exercise, eat healthy. I mean, all of those things are sort of, don't smoke. If you drink alcohol, limit it, don't drink too much. There's a lot of simple solutions out there that can push you towards that healthy lifestyle. You just have to have that willingness.
Yeah. Stay away from plastic bottled water, filter your water.
That's the other thing. That makes a big difference too,
Yes.
because I've kind of given up on plastic water bottles too. If it's not filtered or something, yep.
Filtered. I can carry my filtered water with me always.
I agree.
In a stainless steel container.
All right.
Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here.
Thanks.